Wow, I love being spotlighted. Anyway, hi everybody. Welcome to the Shack. Glad you could make it here this afternoon. Hopefully it'll be interesting and informative and hopefully thought-provoking in a couple of ways. We're going to pick up with part 2 of the presentation that we started here. I always start out with a disclaimer, and that is to remember that if we're talking about manual human interface devices here, and they carry with them certain risks, and so you need to be careful. And if something hurts, stop doing it. If a doctor says don't do something, you're not allowed, don't do it. And if common sense tells you that something's the wrong way to do something, don't do it. You're in charge here, not the words on these papers. So please, safety first, always. What we're trying to do here is to set up a mirror in which experts can see themselves and beginners see their future. That was a feedback that I got from a couple of people from the original video, and that was people said, you know, Chris, I've been doing this a long time, and I've been doing it, and everything you're saying, you're kind of explaining everything that I do, and I just didn't know I was doing it, so thank you for the explanations. And what I said back to the fellow was basically, yeah, well, ideally that's the thing. You should see yourself in these things, but that way, that means the beginner can hold it up and see what they're going to become. And that's kind of what we're trying to accomplish here. For all the fancy verbiage, I started researching how to send fast on a straight key back in 2016 because I wanted to win a sending contest. And to my great surprise, that research led me here today to these conversations. That was an unexpected outcome. Why do I need to know this? Well, maybe you don't. But students do best when they can relate what they know to what they are learning. That's the first thing that we can think about. You don't study just for the sake of studying. If you can put something in a context that makes sense, it's going to be a lot easier. And likewise, it's good to have a roadmap. If you know where you're going, you know where you're heading, it's easier to get there. And when you can judge suggestions for themselves, one of the things that happens to a Morse student is he comes into it and he's going to hear 100 different suggestions from 100 different people that don't necessarily match up. And it's really hard for the student to judge, well, who's got it right? What's right for me at this point in time is not always perfectly obvious. So providing a roadmap helps people solve that. And when people know how things work, then they're better able to fix them for themselves. And teachers of Morse need to know this stuff, frankly, because they can direct their students to better answers, to get closer to their goals, of course. And lovers of Morse need to know this stuff just because we are lovers of Morse. Let's go back for a second. We'll review what was in part 1. Part 1, we put up a chart. We looked at charts showing 3-to-1 code spacing. This is the classic definition of what Morse code is that we have here. We put up a laser pointer. We have here, Morse code defined in terms of the size of a dit, that there's 1 unit between dits and das, or 3 units, and there's so many units of pause. And this is the definitions that we've always had, but this doesn't tell us much about how to make those things. It just tells us what they are. But we discovered that if you combine that with key cycles, and a key cycle graph like this is basically showing, if you can imagine, a key, Morse code key going up and down like so. And of course, this is the center line where it contacts. So the key doesn't really go down here, but the momentum of the hand moving up and down goes up and down like this and cycles up and down. These are called key cycles. Well, if you combine a graph of key cycles with this 3-to-1 graph, you find out that they line up perfectly. That really the definition of Morse isn't in terms of units, it's in terms of key cycles. And the math always works out that 1 dit equals, or rather I should say 1 da equals 2 key cycles. One dit is 1 key cycle, 1 da is 2 key cycles. It's a very precise mathematical relationship. And hey, the good news is that it's easy to make 2-to-1 doubling ratios when we're trying to learn Morse. And those ratios, that's what our letters are that come down. They're all little rhythmic packages, and they're all in the context of this beat called the dit-train. Well, okay, so we found out what the Morse code was, and we have a better action on how it works. But the real question is, How does the Morse code get inside your brain? There is a gap between knowing about the dit train and riding on the dit train. How do sensations change from signals, noise out in the environment, into perception and thoughts and memories? Importantly, by the way, just something highlighted here is the idea that this is a label. It says Paris. That's the same thing these signals are. It's Paris. It's a label. And your entire language system is nothing but a labeling system, a massive, incredible labeling system, but a labeling system nonetheless. If you take away the signals, these noises and stuff that's made in here, what's left, all of this is just in your mind. It's just in your head, all the bits of it, everything that we think that makes Morse code work is all happening up in here. So the point of this really is that half of learning about Morse code is learning about you. It's not just learning the code, because how you work and how your brain functions is going to have an awful lot to do with what your learning experience adds up to. We're going to go back, and some of this is a little bit like a Psych 101 class from a long time ago. If you take a look at this graphic, this is a classic illusion. I always assume everybody's seen everything and knows everything I know, so I assume that everybody has seen this, but I'll describe it. This is called the chalice and the twins is one name for it. And basically, here in the center, this black object in the middle looks a little bit like a chalice, or some people say it'll look like a lamp holder, this vertical shape. But if you look at the white instead of the black, you see the outline of faces, the faces of the twins that are looking at each other. So you're either looking at the chalice or the twins, and your attention can flicker. The brain has to focus and select which one it's looking at. Now that's really an important characteristic, because noticing is the single most crucial skill in Morse code. Because that kind of change of noticing, are you looking at the chalice or are you looking at the twins, that's happening all the time in Morse. Here's a fun one. Here, let's have a little bit of fun with something. This is a drawing of I apologize to those who are fearful of dots and dashes drawn out. You know, I'm sure some people have run shrieking from the room already at the sights of dots and dashes drawn out. But here we have some dots and dashes drawn out that most people would recognize. Most of us, if you're studying Morse, would say, well, that's a bunch of dots and dashes. That's Morse code. But look what happens if you take those lines and you drag them and you drag them down vertical and tall like that. Well, it doesn't really look like Morse code anymore. But you know, it is reminiscent of something else. The first time I did this, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, you know, this reminded me of that. It reminded me of a UPC code, barcodes. And you know what? If you take a barcode and you scroll it up like that, it looks like little dots and lines. It looks just like Morse code. And guess what? The fellow who invented it back in 1948 was inspired by Morse code. He had learned it in the Boy Scouts, and he was drawing it. Here's what he said. He said, I remember thinking about dots and dashes when I poked my 4 fingers into the sand, and for whatever reason, I didn't know, I pulled my hand toward me, and I had 4 lines. I said, golly, now I have 4 lanes, and they could be wide lines and narrow lines instead of dots and dashes. And he went on, and that was what inspired him to invent UPC codes, which everybody sees all around the world. Every day we are surrounded by something which is a derivative of Morse code. And even the more modern ones that we're using today are all derivatives of the same technology. It's all around us, but nobody notices Morse code. Sensations are individual stimulations. If a puff of wind comes along and touches a hair on your skin and tickles it, there's a stimulation and it goes by, and you can sense that. It can hit that. Stimulations stop being noise when you notice that they are, in fact, signals. That means that there is intention behind them. Now, intentions are really interesting. They travel in straight lines. My favorite example is, I remember I used to live on the California coast, and you go down and stand by the kelp bed forests out in the water, which are all these little bobbers, they look like, that are sticking up above the water. And famously, sea otters come and feed there. And you could always tell a tourist would walk up and say, "Are any of those sea otters?" They'd look out there at all these bobbing balls in the water and wonder if one of those was a seal. And I said, "No, just wait." Because if a seal or an otter came through there, you'd instantly see a line. You'd see a straight line moving through the kelp forest. Intention travels in straight lines. Thought, life, travels in straight lines, not circles. And you could see it cutting through. That's how we notice that there are signals, that something is cutting through the noise that has some form and focus to it that you're trying to notice. But the signals gain meaning when you notice them as sets. That's how, if there are just signals out there saying, "Hey, hey, 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 hey," waving of a hand, well, that doesn't tell you anything. It has to be in some sets. There has to be some pattern, some agreement, some protocol has to be put on top of it in order for it to mean anything. And for us in Morse, that means the rhythms. They exist in the context of that imaginary beat. We've talked about the dit-train a number of times now, so you should be getting familiar with that concept. But that's where the rhythms exist in this imaginary beat. And as the background fades, you notice that the sets are there. And repeat exposures to the same rhythm starts creating what I would call ripples in your neural net. It's almost like echoes, like sand on a river bottom, wave reflections that come back 180 degrees out of phase with the signals. And they leave behind like a pattern in an RF circuit. And with repetition, they become pattern sensors. These become like tuned circuits that are waiting for a radio wave to go by. And then when a passing rhythm set happens, and notice, by the way, that a rhythm set does not occur in just a blink. It occurs across time. It has a start and a stop finish point. That's a very important aspect of these things. But those things can trigger, then, instantiate a thought object in your neural net. It has to put something there. So the signals come by and something's got to come on. There's got to be an on switch. Something is saying, "There's one." Not literally saying there's one, but it has to react. There has to be something reacting. And I say, from what other experiments and other research that I've done, I believe that it's very much a resonance phenomena. That these incoming waves resonate with a resonance sensor, and it is very much like plucking a guitar string. These perceived things are like bubbles when they form a perceived thing in your head, and they can persist in the neural net. And it's interesting that the same resonant bubbles lie beneath all the alphabets. Morse code letter A is the same as the letter A that's coming in the regular alphabet. Thought objects, this thing that's forming as a result of this, they're very interesting. These are some fundamentals that go into how language and labeling and thinking works. That thought objects can fuse with each other. You take a letter, comes in, and letter says P. It's available for joining up with others of the same ilk and sort for whatever sorting. So there are hierarchies of set creation and recognition. And that process of labeling is the process of language. And the recombination process after initial labeling is what we call thinking. They occur at different levels in your peripheral system. Now, these thought objects, one of the things that a thought object can do is it can fire off a trained reflex. And this is where one of the dangers that comes in from instant character recognition training is that the question is, when this thought object is formed because the wave form came by, is the thought object going up into the brain for thinking, or is it being used to fire off a reflex to do something else and convert the dits and das? I call it translation because it's actually taking, and if you take this kind of Morse, where you're taking from Morse code into, let's say, typing, you're really translating it from one human understandable form to another human understandable form, instead of from a human understandable form into thought. Those are two different pathways. And the real question is, does doing one leave enough energy for the other? There's a classic story. In other words, if you've made a reflex go off, is there anything left to go on for thought? This is a classic problem in Morse code, and it dates back a long time. One of the classic examples is with Thomas Edison, who back in, I think it was in 1863, 1864, I forget my history, but he was a telegraph operator as a young fellow, and on the night that Lincoln was assassinated, he heard the news. He was with a bunch of other telegraph operators in a cluster, and they saw a bunch of people gathered around the news office very excited because a newspaper had come out, and they sent somebody over to check what all the excitement was about. They went over, and a fellow came back and said, "Lincoln's been assassinated." Now, the thing is, they all looked around at each other because the news had come in on the telegraph, and one of them had copied it down and given it to the newspaper to print. But none of them remembered having done it. In the ear, out the finger, and gone. Nothing available left to think with. That's a classic example of what can go wrong with instant character recognition. So in our training in general, these days, I think it's better to train the head copy first to hard copy rather than going to hard copy and then hoping you can get head copy later. But both do work. Don't misunderstand. There is no one right on here, but this is generally a little bit safer. Head copy goes more in our direction these days. But all that leads us right to the doorstep of the alphabet. And the alphabet tells us that Morse is not an end in itself. For most people, our primary alphabet is this doorway to this labeling system. You have this whole beautiful, incredibly powerful system up and running in your head called language. And you don't have to reinvent a single bit of it. All you have to do here is teach it a new alphabet. It already knows one alphabet. It knows more than one, actually, which we'll get to in just about a second here. The language is basically a labeling system. It's one of the things that I've kind of, in working with it and going through how these things come together all this time. And this also goes back to research that I did many years ago in computers for designing human interfaces, easy to use human interfaces, was that the labeling of things is crucial, and the difference what our brains can do is that we have this system for creating abstract labels that stand for other things and which are recombinant, that can be combined with each other. That is the basis of all higher level thought, is this language labeling system. Rhythms for Morse code are just labels of a different sort for the same underlying thought objects. If the letter P comes in, if you take a letter P printed out here, here's the letter P printed out in a bunch of different fonts. The fact that it's in different fonts doesn't change the underlying letter. It's the same thing. It's based on shape relationships, not upon the absolute little details of squiggles in the shape. And if you take those squiggles and these letters and they're far apart from each other like this, then we see these are individual chunks, P-A-R-I-S, separate chunks. But if you take space and time out of it and bring them together and close the view aperture, if you bring things closer together, they become something else when they are drawn into association with each other. And this is common throughout your entire perceptual system, is that association creates a new kind of thing. Audible, and for example, there's two kinds of characters. When I said there are two alphabets, we have one here, which is the written alphabet. We also have a spoken alphabet. And the spoken alphabet, a letter P, has the same thing under it as the written letter P, is what those strokes are. So it's the same underlying. But again, when you put those, it's the same, but those are, so it's really a different alphabet, even though it's a different expression of it. But when you put them together like this, it's very interesting that a word becomes more of a shape and time and size and volume. Paris, the letters have formed together into a new kind of thing. And that's one of the most interesting parts of this. This brings us to a perceptual portion of this that's kind of fun. At least it is for me, hopefully for you. If I can find the right screen to put my cursor on to do what I want to do, you should be seeing my slinky up in front of you. At least that's the theory here. There we go. And this is one of those diagrams that shows Morse code laid out horizontally, and we can see here we see a bunch of big signals. And I'm assuming you all can see this. If you can't, you let me know. But there's big signals here, dots representing dots and dashes. It's big chunky pieces here that we can see. But notice what happens when we shrink the amount of space they occupy. When we shrink them in size and space. Now, this is the little slinky, I call it. I can't call it that, I suppose, because it's trademarked. Notice what's noticeable here. What's most noticeable when they're large are these big individual chunks of signals. But as you shrink it down, the signals are not necessarily as visible as the sets. At different frequencies, the sets become just as visible or more visible than the individual chunky characters. This is called a perceptual aperture. Your perceptual aperture is taking in smaller chunks and focusing down so you see what's perceivable shows differently. As you close it down more, notice what happens as it starts getting really small. Down here, the sets and all that are still there, but notice how all of a sudden the gaps between them now look big in this visual image. Okay? And if you shrink it down even more, just the gaps are kind of left, but the whole thing becomes a smudge. This is the effect of frequency on perception. This is exactly the same in the visual domain and in the audible domain. It works exactly the same as far as I am able to determine. That given the size of this and the amount of time it takes your eye to scan across it and the size of the signals that are coming through and the length of time they're in there, what is most noticeable are the chunks in this when you're going, and this is the equivalent of going slow. As you're going faster and faster, the sets become visible. And because the separations become obvious, as you get faster and faster still, it changes. So what's changing and what's most easily noticeable about Morse changes with frequency and speed. And that is the real basis of most of the problems and most of the good things that happen when you're learning and using Morse code, is that change in perception. If you sum that up like this, you'll see this chart a couple of other times in the presentation. Again, showing that just in this one, the dits and das dominate the visual field. They dominate the perceptual field. And when you compress it down, here the sets tend to dominate, and here the separations are dominating, and here they're tending to blur together. These are very much the equivalent of going up from, say, 5 words a minute to 35 words a minute. This is the kind of thing that happens in your perception. So Morse has these 3 states. Morse has 3 different perceptual states depending on speed. It can be discrete signals, it can be rhythm sets, or it can be thought objects. I'll point out, by the way, that this isn't just magic. This happens in other things in the physics world as well. Water changes state with temperature, as we know. It can be water, it can be clouds, vapor, or it can be ice, all at the same time. It can go between these 3 states interchangeably. Morse code can do the same thing. And this changes by the vibrational rate of the molecules rather than the vibrational rate of the signals, which is a very interesting parallel if you think about it. And with Morse, part of our problem, and this really is the source of the problem, is that all 3 states can be visible at once. If you take a look at this up here, you can see, in this one, let's go down to the smallest one down here. This is the smallest one that's up here. I can see sets and I can see individual signals if I look close, and I can see them blending together. You see they're all visible at once. And the real question is, well, which one am I looking at? When you've got a string of code going by you, are you looking at signals? Are you looking at sets? Are you looking at things? Are you looking at signals, sets, things, You are what you practice, and state changes and flicker are at the root of the famous Morse learning plateaus. The fact that people get stuck at things is because you start in at a level that you think is easy, which is down in the counting range, and then you find that you're learning to perceive here, but you have to change what you are noticing in order to up your speed. It's not just more of this, you have to change how and what. And likewise, as you go up the scale, it's changing. You are what you practice. These things, by the way, these are built solidly into the old FCC licensing requirements that a lot of us had to deal with back in the past, that the novice was 5 words a minute and general 13, extra was 20. For sending and for copying. And for sending, you had to be able to send it 20 words a minute. And the pro had to do 25 words a minute. In fact, the British pros had to do 27 words a minute, sending text, plain text on a straight key. That was the test. I did this back in 2016 for something or another and compared it to counting and memorizing at 5 and instant expression, the ability to think, up at 25 words a minute. I sort of made that one up, and turns out that was pretty accurate. Now, when you take a look at visual flicker, it's something that we deal with routinely. This is a very well-studied topic. It was discovered really in 1878 when the first video was made. We saw flicker. And the phenomena of this, if you watch it as a video, is very interesting. This old video from way back then, one of the first things I noticed as a photographer is that even at these lousy frame rates, 16 frames a second this was at, the light on the horse is really quite beautiful. The light changes that are occurring across its shoulders. But you really get the illusion of thing. But if you can slow it down on this, which makes it kind of nice, you can slow it down and take a look at it, let's say at 1/4 speed. Now it's really, really clear that you're looking at individual pictures to do all of this. They're just individual pictures. But as you speed it up to the normal speed, it gets back and plays itself. You can even go faster if you want. And it has been extremely well studied in the psychological field. It's very basic to understanding of how things work in your head, this flicker phenomena. Visual flicker is not an all or none phenomenon. This is very important. A very important fact is that visual flicker occurs over a range, meaning that if you have a film, you can have a film at, say, 13 frames a second that'll show a lot of flicker, and if you speed it up to 25 frames a second, it'll have effectively no flicker. But you can also put it up to a higher level, and it'll have even less flicker. You can adjust these things for how much flicker is tolerable in what you're looking at. And the illusion of reality keeps increasing as the frequency goes up. The sense of analog reality is going up. It's been very well studied. A lot of factors influence it. Well, in Morse, flicker is called falling off the dit-train. And the same factors that impact falling flicker in the visual field impact the same kinds of things that influence it in the visual field, influence it in Morse code. In Morse code, we have frequency, the speed, the equivalent of a frame speed in words per minute that it's running. We have attention, that you have to be looking at it. You have adaptability to speed states, this fact that we're changing back and forth from signals to groups and rhythms, and that this all is going on in your head at the same time. You have to be adaptable to different speed states. There are psychological factors that add into it, distractions in the signal-to-noise ratio, volume, pitch, physiological things. Any of these can cause flicker, and all of these are things that more students are going to run into. Every single one of these is subject to training and to practice and to drills and to understanding that these are the things that will make Morse be not exactly what you expect it to be. What you perceive depends on what you are looking at. Once again, going back to this little chart here, what you see here are signals. What you see here are groups, but you can still see the signals. The signals are still there. They didn't go away. You have to be looking for the groups in order to see them. You have to know that there are groups. You have to be looking for the groups to see them instead of the signals, because the signals are still there. That's the flicker, is when you're not on, are you on the group or are you on the individual dits and das? Are they grabbing your attention and pulling you off so that you're breaking from signals into rhythms and signals into rhythms and back and forth again? That's the nature of it. And the bad news here is that Morse lives right in the flicker danger zone. It lives right in the band of frequency ranges where flicker is most prevalent. The same thing happens, by the way, with tones. Tones is another thing, that just noises. If you take noises like a helicopter blade, wop, 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 make noise, as the frequency goes up, it stops being individual noises and becomes a thing called a tone. In a movie, individual frames stop being individual pictures and become a thing called a movie. In Morse code, they stop being signals, and they become letters and words in your head. The same kind of thing is happening. And fascinating stuff. But wait, he says on the slide. Right around this time, when I was developing this thought process, this was back in 2021, 2022, a thought occurred to me that really was, I mean, my head was ready to explode from all this stuff being packed into it. I had all these rules, and look at this is happening, and flicker, and all this stuff's going on. And it occurred to me that dits are twice as fast as das, which means they flicker at different words per minute. And that was the brain exploder. That was the point at which I said, this is all, I can't do this qualitatively anymore. I need to get a little bit quantitative here. And I started laying out charts and diagrams. We went from just kind of word pictures into some charts and diagrams, and I took a lot of these numbers and I posted them up onto this chart. This is a version of the chart that was started up. And I'll take you through this real quick. You don't have to memorize any of this, because I'm going to put all these charts and stuff will be up on the MorseBusters site, so you can download them if you'd like to study them more. So let's just see how they work rather than the details that are on them. But basically, the flicker fusion zone is showing the frequencies here in terms of hertz, in terms of frequencies, in which you get flicker in movies. That movies and hearing things exhibit this flicker phenomena. And that runs from up to about 25 frames a second and down to about 14, 15 frames a second is the speed at which you're going to get flicker in movies. And I plotted other things in here, motion, kinds of motion, and things in different domains of operation. And the really interesting thing that jumps out of you, to come over here and you take a look at plotting dits and das, you notice a very interesting thing, and that is that dits flicker in the 13 to 30 word per minute range is where dits are going to be flickering. Below that, slower than that, dits are solid. Above that, dits are morphing into a continuous tone. But das continue to be individual tones right up to about 27 to right on 30 words a minute, is where das only start to blend together. And then up at 60 words a minute is where flicker fusion is complete for das, and that's what we call full QRQ. It's very well known, people have said many times. The Morse Ninja fellow even commented on it at one point, that above 60 words a minute, Morse changes. You bet your bippy it does. Why? Because above that, you're getting fusion. Here is dit fusion, here is da fusion, and above about 60 words a minute, you have a fully fused Morse sound, in which the sounds are no longer discernible as individual sounds. And they truly fuse into one another. And so you're hearing a completely different form of Morse. It has changed state. Cool it? Well, anyway, so this is where I was, and I was having fun with this, and I was working on the book at the time, by the way. And then I had one of those things that happen one morning when you're looking at it and you're working on it. And I said, you know, most of what I've been looking at on this deals with Morse on the incoming side, changing from dits and das into meaning and thought. But what had started my research in the first place was the sending side of taking things in the brain and converting them into dits and das on the outflow side. And at that point, it kind of hit me. It went off. And I drew this. April 8, 2022, I drew this on a Post-it note. And I'll save your eyes and you having to try and figure out what the heck I'd put on here. And here's basically what I'd put on there. And it says good vibrations, and it shows the rise of consciousness. And over here we have this circle with Morse code outflowing here and being sent, and Morse code inflowing here down in this range of discrete events, inflowing discrete events through the flicker fusion zone, up into the language zones, and back again and flacking out and flowing in here. And up in the fusion zones, you had consciousness arising. What I saw was that this was like a whirlpool of energy flowing in and out of the body. And up in the deep well of consciousness in the brain, you'd get this whirlpool. And in the center of the whirlpool, that would be us, sitting there. And I said, okay, so yeah, like now I'm trying to derive half the religions of the world are coming, jumping out of the study of Morse code at me. Not my fault, I apologize, but that changed everything for me, and it was really, I went on a deep dive down that hole of exploring that in some depth. And what I'm going to show you next got a lot of numbers on it. Again, you do not need, I apologize in advance, you don't need to look at this or memorize any of this. It'll all be up. But within about 12 weeks, that chart had exploded into this. Is where it had gone. And I won't even try to go over this in detail. Again, it's up, and then a while later, actually just a few weeks ago, I cleaned that up and edited it a little bit down into this. And this one shows it in some detail, and we'll go over this. Maybe we'll do a separate session, a 201 or a 301 session, but this deserves some study and some refinement. But you are all welcome to look at that. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, man, look at all that stuff. And then I thought, hey, this reminds me of the OSI 7-layer model. I was an IT guy, a network guy for a long time. And gee, this has got things down happening in the media layers and the host layers and blah, 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 and it's all going on and around. And it's like, hold them, good, slow down. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's all exploding, and it was turning into too many numbers and too much data, too much significance being attached and piled on top of it. So, oh, what a cute kitty. All right. So let's slow down and take a little bit different look at this. Here we have, let's get back to this chart, which is a simplification. And let's see if we can take that larger chart that I was showing with all the numbers on it and just simplify it a little bit and get something a little more useful out of it. And what it comes down to is this. This is if you clean up all the numbers on that and take a look at it, what you have here is this showing, if we start over here with things, Morse code as things, discrete events out in the physical world. At low frequencies, discrete events come up into the flicker fusion zone where they're joined in sets. They come up through the labeling zone in language and in the recombination zone where they're labeled. They come up into thought where they go together as thought. And at this level in labeling, this is where the bypass can occur. And you can set up, with training, we can set up reflexes that would bypass all this thought stuff up here and just go directly from this and go pop over here and pop a finger down. What's happening out here, it's coming out as an A. It's coming out in a typewriter or something like that. It's popping back out of it. That's one of the alternatives. Or this is available for thought in recombination in other patterns. And those things are available at this line. This line I call it's like an event horizon for reality. This is the perceptual reference frame. That on this side of it is where I live, where you live. We live in our world here, and this is the filter through which we view reality. And it's built like this. And this is the Morse cycle. This is the way Morse works. This is the way Morse code works. And here we see it in terms of frequency. We see it in things and language and reality. And one of the side things that I noticed in doing this that was interesting to me, the way my mind works, is that I realized that if this is the neural net over here, if you take a simpler organism, let's say an amoeba or a paramecium or a single-celled organism. This is the same system is going to be in work for them. It's just that the size or depth of the capacity of the neural net doesn't support the creation of this vast mental whirlpool. And so it reflexes down here. The lower organisms end up down here is as high as they're able to go in terms of this flow and cycle. But this same flow of cycle has to be occurring in all living things. That also lines up with other research done by Miller and other people in living systems. It's really quite a beautiful thing that this is the way Morse works. What use is that? What use is this to teaching students? Well, I'll give you a couple just to kind of end off this so we don't go on forever here. Here's one of the things you can derive from taking a look at this, starting over here, and you say attention turns things into thoughts with labels. It's a very important factoid, that the fact that you have attention that's going out here and focusing on things, you're sort of pulling this information into your brain by labeling it and bringing it up into the thought zone where it can be manipulated. But once it's thought on the other side, when you want to take a word, the word the, or cat, or Paris, and send it, you have to start with the word up here, and intention has to turn the thought into action with technique. Technique is what brings the thoughts down to action over here. That also explains why copying Morse code starts at the bottom, but sending starts with thought, which is fast. We always question, why does everybody want to send faster than they can copy the code? It's very simple. Very predictable. If you take a look at this chart. Sending starts at the level of thought, where it's all very fast. Your brain says, Mary had a little lamb, and wants to just shoot it out. And it has to go through these layers and be taken apart and disassembled and sent out. It starts fast and becomes slow at the end. It slows down to get out. Code coming in does exactly the opposite. It starts slow and is gathered together and fused to get in. Those are the two sides of the cycle. Makes perfect sense. So that wraps it up for today. Next time, in Keymanship 103, we're going to, I don't want to drive you too far into the ground with this, but in Keymanship 103, we're going to take a closer look at the output side, on the sending side. A lot of work's been done on that inflow side. You'll see it in LICW's training materials and in others, where they show different levels of how we build words and build a vocabulary and build things in buffers and such. Well, the exact same functions occur on the outflow side, and we're going to talk about those in some detail, along with code talking and code making in Keymanship 103. So meanwhile,
I think one of the neat things about your work, Chris, is that your model allows us to see where perhaps during the thought process, taking a moment to say, darn, what was that? What was that? What was that? Interferes with this flow. And for me, at least, that's one of my major problems. When I'm trying to copy code and I miss one letter, I start thinking too much. And it fits in there. And maybe you could describe how it might fit into the, I guess it's in the thought stage. Is that right?
Yeah, it's in the flicker stage when that's happening there. It's basically when you miss a letter, effectively what is happening is either you don't know it, or it resembles something else, or it is triggering something other than what you expect it to trigger. And so it breaks the data flow. You fall off the dit-train at that point in time. And the real secret is, how do you get back on?
Yeah.
You're in changing between the flicker, in looking between the two things. If you're following along and you're copying set, and you're getting things, and all of a sudden you look at something, grabs your attention, and you go, oh, there's some characters, what was that? You've now stopped looking at sets. And then you've stopped doing that, and you need to get back to looking at the sets again. So the real secret is to look at one and ignore the rest. It is like, you're a pilot, Tom, are you not?
Yes, indeed.
Well, you're familiar then with the phenomenon of night flying, that when you're trying to see a light in the night sky or a star in the night sky, if you look directly at it, it disappears. You have to avert your eyes and pick it up in your peripheral vision in order to see it. And the same thing is true of these sets. They really occur in our peripheral vision, not in our direct vision. If you look too close, we have very good direct vision. So if you look real close, and the closer you're trying to look at the code, what you will see is dits and das. You'll see the individual signals because they're there until you get going really fast. It's still possible to see them. You have to not look close. You have to defocus and step back and let it flow.
Great analogy, Chris. Thanks.
As I said, those charts, which I wouldn't torture people by putting those charts up for a great long time period and saying, you have to memorize this today. That's totally crazy. But those who really want to take a look at them and give some thought to how these things flow, I'm making those available for the world. Just saying, here, people, observe these. May they be of use. And I personally find them to be of great use. As I think I said to you, Tom, when I started seeing it as a flow, I found it actually life-changing. It was very important in my view of life and living this, what it means to be alive. When that vibration engine stops, that's what we call not being alive anymore. That we are that whirlpool at the center that's running, and when the whirlpool stops, well, that's the cessation. And we are all instances in the same sort of whirlpool. I like that. I'm very comfortable with that viewpoint of reality.
Okay, so with that, would the flicker rate increase as your proficiency increases, or is it always there and you're just waiting to get to it?
There are parts of it that are physiological. Like in the brain, when you're looking at pictures in the brain, there is a delay that occurs. Like the nerve signals come in, takes a while for them to rise, and they have, I can't not do it in front of the camera. The nerve signal comes in, has a rise time, and it stays high for a while and has a fall, and there's an overlap. If the signals are overlapping, then you're getting a signal that seems to persist across because of the persistence in like a phosphor, just like it is on a TV screen. You're getting a persistence phenomena that occurs as that's a physical phenomena, but that physical phenomena is impacted by a lot of things that are going on around it, like attention, age, noise, all the things, and training. Training impacts it, wanting to get the information out of it, and motivation is an important factor in being able to get things out of it, but they're there the whole time. You get this flicker going back and forth. And flicker is just that back and forth thing to where the mind can do it two ways. In fact, flicker is what's happening in this entire band here of language. Language, when you're putting words together and stuff, they sort of flicker too, and thoughts flicker. We even speak of thoughts. Well, a thought flickered through my mind, and we're assembling thoughts, and we're trying to write sentences, and they're forming into these formal things that form thoughts. There's a flicker here, and so there's this flicker fusion layer here where discrete things first turn into sets. But then there's another flicker line up here where things turn into reality, where things that are occurring here, I think what's happening is up here, these are actually just standing waves in our neural net, that what we think of as reality is a massive standing wave setup. So there's two flicker lines that are occurring in here, because you can see it occurring as you get into taking a look at some of the other thought things. If you go back, let me see if I can get back to...
Well, the way you held that label at 120, where that top flicker line is about what humans, on average, what human speech is in words per minute.
Right, and if you go back, that's the point of this chart, on things like this chart. It has things like, what's the maximum speed limit, how fast do humans talk, what are our thought rates? Those are the kind of things that I plastered all over this chart. I was getting data points from lots of different fields and putting them in here and observing that, oh, look at how these things all come together and kind of line up with each other. There's a correspondence between the kind of things that are occurring and the kind of uncertainties that occur in thought and in building language as occur in this first recognition of sets that occurs down here. So there's this secondary, the flicker occurs before it crosses that line to where you go, okay, that's it, it's a table. And that's reality. Up here, there's no flicker on whether it's a table or not. Dang it, that's reality. But down here, things are flickering. And this line moves. This line moves depending upon the complexity of the organism, as I was saying, and frankly, the person. This is how we always say, how could they believe that about other people? How could they possibly believe that? It actually just means that the right combination of things made it up through their flicker line, and it got to this side, and once it's up here and it resonates, bump, that's it. It's real, and it's part of reality. And reality is the combination of all the things out here in the real world, plus the things that are made real in the thinking world is what we perceive as reality up in the top level. Yeah, this is what I say. This is a real rabbit hole. You could spend the rest of your days working on this and expanding it and examining its hills and valleys and fixing it, improving it, and adding depth to it and such. There's a lot to talk about. You can see it over here. This is the inflow side, where these are, I called this the chart of perceptual, cognitive, and functional domains. Isn't that a nice name? Because it's exactly what it was. Here are these perceptual domains in which we're perceiving things, and then there are the cognitive domains where we're processing it, and there are the functional domains where we do something about it. You know, it's one thing to, I have an idea here. Well, how does that idea turn into Morse code? Or a letter, or a type, or anything? How do I pick an apple off the tree? That has to turn into actions. It has to be boiled down and distilled through these sets into the same way and down into actions and change feedback, and we exist in this loop.
On a more light-hearted note, Chris, how much alcohol were you consuming when you put that chart together?
Way too much. No, not. Probably not enough. I think.
In order to understand it, I'm going to have to drink a couple of bottles of wine.
Well, you know, the point of this, I drew a version of this chart back at the time, back in 22, and I sent it to a good friend of mine. And he said, Chris, we need a primer. We need some way of being able to kind of take a guide walk through these things and take a look at what they are. And that's sort of the purpose of what's been tried to do here, is to kind of show this is how it was derived, this is where these pieces came from, get somebody thinking in these terms of forming sets and these things coming together, and then just starting to put them up on a chart against frequency and say, well, look, what all these phenomena that are occurring at different frequencies in your world, and look at how they all line up. I find that to be utterly beautiful. I just love it when things come together like that. And when you see it in other areas. So I didn't have to drink too much, but as I said, it was a couple of this. The first version of this actually could date back to 1980, because there's pieces of this start back, this feedback loop here. All my research in human interface devices for computers and designing computer systems was based upon the idea of what I called a mind amplifier. That was to provide feedback to go into and to amplify these things that the human mind was not natively good in, like word processors and spreadsheets and all that. I viewed as mind amplification tools. And so the first versions of this really emerged for me that long ago. But it took a long time for all the pieces to come together. And finally, and the fact that it came out of Morse code just cracks me up. You know, I wasn't planning to do all this. This wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go do this. This just sort of went blip, 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 and fell out of things that were happening. And so I feel like it was a gift of one sort or another.